Welcome back to the Pastor's Podcast. Pastor Scott here for the 7th volume of Cornerstone History.
Wow.
Cornerstone History Volumes, and to celebrate Cornerstone History Volume 7, there are 4 of us in the room.
Wow.
1, 2. Yeah, you're
I
right.
honestly, so I have to say, this is Matt. I have to say, the Cornerstone History podcasts are spectacular. You guys have done a really fantastic job. It's very, very, it's been very fun to listen to. So to be a part of one is a great honor.
A volume, no less.
A volume.
Not an installment.
Not an installment.
A volume.
A volume.
I love it.
That's what we called it on the podcast. So I have to go with it. And now I'm stuck.
You're
That's
locked
what we
in.
called number 1. It was volume 1, and so now
Brian hasn't listened
Can't change
to
it
any of
now.
them. Brian hasn't. I over here am a big fan. Brian hasn't listened at all.
I mean, seriously, isn't it like one of your favorite things in the world to just listen to Jim Leonard tell stories?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's my favorite. Yeah.
You just listen to
Yeah,
yourself.
just myself. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is an incredible way the entire church gets to and see the incredible glory of the Lord through as he recounts it. I've been working through the Old Testament recently, and this is the whole point, right? But basically, the whole point. Hey, tell your kids, tell everyone else, make sure you write it down, not so that people can be impressed with you, because usually when they see you, they're not impressed, but so that people can just be amazed at the glory of God, right? And the miraculous things that he does.
Truly. And that is what this history is. It's about God's hand upon this place and these people, generation by generation. It's stunning. It's just stunning. This church should never have survived the fire in 1912 or whatever it was. This isn't going gangbusters.
It's a great word, stunning.
Stunning.
I thought you were saying gangbusters.
That's also a great word.
The Great Fire of 1912.
So today, in today's volume of the history, Jim's hitting microphones over here. We're going to take a little bit of a detour. We've been walking through the history for 6 episodes over the history of First Baptist Church of First Sawtell, and then what became First Baptist Church of West Los Angeles. We're going to move forward in the next episode to the iteration of Cornerstone when the name changed. But in order to tell that story, we have to take a step back and talk about the story of Shoreline Church. And because in the great merge of 2011,
As it will be known henceforth.
I wonder if the fire was actually 1911. Like maybe great
It was exactly
momentous things
100 years.
happen
A merge
every
in a
100
giant
years.
fire.
What's next?
Good parallel, yeah.
people will be holding their
111.
breath in 2111.
They'll be listening to this podcast, and if you're listening to this podcast in 2110, beware.
Get ready.
Something's coming.
It's a year or 2.
I think it's something to do with artificial intelligence. The first robot pastor.
So
You wish you had a robot pastor. You're stuck with us.
man, this is not going to be easy. In 2011, First Baptist Church of West Los Angeles merged together with Shoreline Church to form what we now know as Cornerstone Church. All of us come together. And Shoreline Church was the iteration of this church that Brian, Matt, and myself were all a part of. We knew that. And so we want to kind of tell the history of that, which was essentially the story of that began in 2005. Shoreline was a church plant that planted in the latter part of 2005. But kind of like church planting, we're doing this without any notes. We didn't prepare. I didn't give you any preparatory questions. We're just jumping in.
Yeah, but 2005, didn't it start before 2005?
So
The church was officially planted in
how did-
2005. Go before. Go
I don't
before
think it did.
2005.
Brian, how did the story
There had to
start?
have been more planning involved.
I was born in San Jose in 1980. The year of our Lord, 1980. So, I mean, probably the best place to start is Scott and I, on the first day of our orientation at seminary, met each other because we were both sitting in the very back.
Yeah.
and became fast friends, as people who tend to sit in the very back are, want to do. And so it was there that we met and developed a relationship. And the church plant kind of came after you and I became friends and hung out weekly at IHOP, fine dining at its highest.
Jim, do you have any questions about that?
So
IHOP, that's where you jump in with questions about what they ate and what they drank.
What milkshakes were available at what times.
You're the food expert.
The foodie?
the IHOP foodie.
First I heard of it.
So we met in 2003.
Yes.
And then this was only,
That's crazy.
yeah, right? Like, so we became friends, hung out. There was a small group of us at seminary that we hung out with. And then we spent some time with one of our professors regularly. And then the semester changed. And I want to say it was the end of 2004, beginning of 2005. We started, you were on staff as an intern at Bel-Air Presbyterian.
Yeah.
I was on staff as an intern at Cornerstone Church in Simi Valley. And we'd meet up in between. The only place we could find, apparently, was an IHOP.
Yeah, in the valley somewhere, right?
Yeah. And just to talk life and ministry and things like that. And
whose idea was it?
Well, I was going to say, I don't even know.
I don't remember.
Well, so this is
God's
how I remember the
God's
story.
idea.
I realized we were going to have to, we didn't even compare stories. We're going to have to correct each other's stories as we go. But my memory, so part of the story for me was about early that year, in the very beginning of that year in 2005, Francis Chan, who I was on staff, he was the pastor there at the time I was on staff, was meeting with him, and he, in very like Francis fashion, just said, so, I've been wondering, like, what's next for you? Like, what do you think God's doing? And I was like, I don't know. I'm in seminary, so I figured I'd finish seminary. I mean, right? And he goes, I don't know, maybe.
Sounds right.
And at which point I was like, wait, that's a question? Like, that's an option? And so this was also in a season in the life of Cornerstone Simi when a number of different church plants were being sent out. Right. We sent out at least a church plant a year, if not more. And so there was a big culture of church planting. And as I prayed about it, I was talking with Laura about it. The way my memory goes is I asked you, hey, I've been thinking and praying about this. Like, what if we talked about planting a church? And you were like, I've been thinking and praying about the same thing. At which point I was like, oh no, like, this is serious. Like, it went from that would be a cool idea to God might actually be doing something. Uh-oh.
Yeah, that sounds right. Because I was living out here. So after graduating from UCLA, I was living over on Berkeley Street, between Wilshire and Arizona.
1247?
1247 Berkeley Street.
Man, how do I still know that?
Top back apartment. And so I was living with people who have been a part of the church for a long time now. And we were all driving out to Simi Valley. Mm-hmm. So it's weird to think there were actually, First Baptist was here. And there were some other churches here. Trinity was over in Santa Monica. But there actually, a lot of the churches we know of now in this area didn't exist in 2003. And so I don't know if I actually knew First Baptist was here at that point. This is also like the internet existed, but it was a little different. Like, you didn't necessarily Google things.
Oh, I remember what First Baptist's website looked like.
Yeah, I forgot until just now.
And it did not convey you can come here and worship.
Horrendous.
But you hold on a sec. You guys we got to stop just a second. First of all, so that's all helpful. How old were you guys? Can you give us like a context for how old you were at this time?
We were, in 2003.
Yeah, when you first met, how old were you? Because in 2003,
at the end of 2003, I turned 23, and Scott turned 23 the following year.
Okay, just want to give some context for everybody.
So this is seminary.
So we were 22 years
went to
old.
seminary right after college.
Yes. Okay, just clarifying for everybody. And you guys at that time, there's a group of people, and I feel like I almost need to host this because you guys are just going to ramble on. Like at this time,
asking for more information.
You're doing great, Matt. Keep going. You're doing great.
Yep. Freeze.
In West LA, there's a group of people going up to Simi Valley to see to be a part of Cornerstone Simi Valley.
To go see Francis.
Right, yeah.
Well, I almost said it that way.
Francis.
I was like, yeah. Because you had been connected. I mean, you'd been connected through
At
conferences
UCLA,
or
we knew
other
we had
things.
some mutual friends who were from Simi Valley originally. So back in college, we had gone up there because that was their home church, and they were driving back there to go to church.
It wasn't like there's an on-campus group at UCLA or anything. It was just coincidental,
It
organic.
was a very kind of providential sort of, and very random in that sense, kind of like why that would happen through these weird set of connections. Who knows? But we ended up driving up there, a very small group of us who a few of us were living together afterwards and continuing to drive up there. And I met Scott at seminary and found out he worked there. And so I became friends with a lot of the staff who were at seminary, who also worked at Cornerstone. So where I was attending church and people I was attending seminary with, there was a lot of overlap there. And so kind of my location in West LA, it seemed like we were driving a long ways to go to church. And I also knew that there were a ton of people in West LA and not a ton of churches as far as I knew. And so the idea of starting a church or possibly even multiplying off, I think I had pitched maybe a college group or a young adults group. Maybe we could just kind of not have people drive so far.
Did neither of you have a plan when going into seminary, or was this something that disrupted that plan?
I didn't have a plan.
I didn't have a plan.
Okay. Yeah,
I mean,
that's
it
helpful
was
to
just
know.
we were getting trained. But so
No offense. You
by
were
my
22
memory,
years old
by
or
my
whatever.
memory, this conversation, the initial conversation happened in February 2005,
I think that's right.
and we planted the church in October 2005.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, lots of conversations happened, and things happened pretty quickly, as they did at Cornerstone See Me in those
Well,
days.
we were planning on doing it after we graduated in 2006.
Yes.
That was the idea, that we'll graduate seminary and plant a church, and that felt like a good time and kind of quick. And then Francis had a conversation with both of us like that.
Yeah.
That was like, well, why not now?
Yeah.
And we kind of stammered and went I don't know, because you finished seminary first. And he was like, why?
Yeah.
Which is a very kind of Francis I mean, why rule something out?
Mm-hmm.
And so we ended up moving ahead.
Yeah. And at that point, I think we basically have to fast forward a lot of it, but
We don't have to. There could be multiple volumes.
I
of
think
the
there really should only be
Shoreline
one. No, I really think there should only be one volume of this, but we could do this in different ways. But this all kind of fast forwarded, and as we were talking about planning it, even when we started talking about planning a church, we didn't know where.
Yeah.
We were praying about and looking at different areas. We were talking about different areas, and Brian was living here. He's living in Santa Monica, and he said, we really should look at West LA. And my initial response was, LA doesn't need more churches, right? And he's like, then you haven't really seen and understood what's happening in West LA. And so we came down.
You had not lived.
I had not lived here.
You were living up in
I was living in
Simi.
Simi.
Okay.
And
you went to school
and came
in
down,
in
came
Thousand
down to go to
Oaks.
3rd Street like
Yeah.
your Simi people do.
Right.
And at that point, we spent a little bit of time down here. We actually visited and went to church at First Baptist one Sunday.
That's right. Yeah.
Was Jim
And,
preaching?
No, it was the youth guy before Kevin
That's right.
that was preaching. It wasn't even Jerry.
Yeah.
And visited West LA, and the more we spent time here, it just became very, very obvious that. And now, as a part of this, Laura. So Brian was single. I was married. Laura was pregnant with Harper, and she's like, "Okay, I'm about to have my first child." Like the last place in the world I ever saw myself living was in LA. Like she just, and a part of how the Lord led and guided was that in the midst of all these conversations, he did a really significant work in her heart, and brought not just a willingness, but over time, just a love for the city that we just kept seeing the Lord changing and drawing our hearts to the desperate gospel need here in this part of the city.
Mm-hmm. I did not make that easier for her. I don't think.
You did not?
I don't think I did. I'm remembering like the
because
first
you were
time
not
she came
married?
down and no. But I think I have this recollection of meeting, the two of you came down and I was sick, and I was and Matt has mentioned how socially kind of pristine I am in meeting others and being
Pristine.
extroverted.
All right. That's a really specific word. That's great. I've never used that word to describe you socially, but you are.
I'm just trying to kind of cull together the many things you've said and find an adjective for them. But yeah,
I would have gone with unique, but pristine works.
I know that I had very little idea of what that process was like for her specifically, like kind of how how tentative that was, and like maybe how fragile it was. I had no clue. Partially because I was a single guy that didn't have really a context for like
You're
how
23.
decisions get made. Yeah, like when you're married.
Yeah.
But also like just I don't think I was helpful in many ways, but that was one of them.
So as we talked about this and prayed about it, there ended up being there was a group of people that were driving up to see me that lived here that wanted to be a part of this new church. There were a few people that chose to move down from Simi to be a part of this church. There were a few other people that got connected to be a part of this church. And all of a sudden we had this core group of 20-ish.
Yeah, 20 to 30 probably.
20, 25 people. And two of which were Matt Kleinhands and Nicole Zanaboni.
Mm-hmm.
And but you guys weren't going up to see me. You guys didn't move down from see me. How did you guys get connected with this core group before the church even planted?
Yeah, so the church that I grew up in, the youth pastor was kind of took me under his wing in the senior year of high school, and we would listen to Francis sermons on CD. So and then we went up to, I think we had like a college briefing event up some sort of college retreat or something up in Big Bear area, and Francis was speaking. And so basically I was listening to Francis sermons pretty regularly on the internet back then, and Nicole and I started dating senior year of high school, and that's a whole thing, but we both decided to go to UCLA and both ended up at UCLA, and so continued dating. And as we were up here, we were wondering, like, should we get involved with a church, or should we get involved with an on-campus group or whatever? And we were listening to a Francis sermon, and he had said, we're going to be planting a church in Santa Monica. And so we were like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. We should probably be a part of whatever God's doing there. And so we I think Nicole emailed you, Brian, initially, and kind of asked. At that point, there were no services. It was just a prayer meeting over at 1247 Berkeley. And so we tried to figure out, we're from the suburbs. Right. We tried to figure out the bus system. I think the first time we were going to go, we got lost and got on the wrong bus, going the wrong way, or like, we're from the suburbs. It was like, oh, the bus is supposed to show up. The blue bus is supposed to show up here at 6:42 p.m. And we're like there at 6:42 and looking around like, I don't know if this is right or what. I don't think we've ever taken a bus in our life. But anyway, so we just started showing up then, and was pretty cool to be a part of what God was doing there.
Yeah.
And that's what was happening then was we had Sunday afternoon. We had like after someone would go to church at the church they were at that time, that core group would gather, and we'd go through kind of like core values or talk with the group that way. And we had Thursday night prayer meetings, where at that same apartment. So basically that Berkeley apartment became this weird, like unintended hub for this church plant, because I lived there and so did three other gentlemen who became a part of the church plant. And so we just would host constantly. And that's what Matt came to. And there were several other people that sort of found us somehow, who would end up at these prayer meetings that consisted of prayer requests and a lot of ice cream.
Yep. Yeah.
Moose tracks.
Yeah.
And all the variations of moose tracks.
And so that continued through that was basically the fall of 2003. And then I believe it was the first weekend in November.
2005.
I'm sorry, 2005. Yeah. Yes. Fall of 2005. And then the first weekend in November, we held our first public service at the Doubletree Hotel in Santa Monica. They're on the corner of 4th Street and the 10. And at the time, you were 24. I was 24. Were you 18?
Yeah.
You were
barely,
18.
Yeah.
Barely 18. And
so two things to mention here. One, the Doubletree Hotel, which is now a Hilton. Is that right? We went by the other day.
Yeah, we went by. We have a picture in the old room.
It's basically on top of the 10 freeway and walking distance from the beach. Hence, Shoreline.
Yeah.
the name Shoreline.
Yeah.
You will hear in our history,
it
we
made sense.
we progressively moved east, and it made less and less sense.
Yeah.
Also, there is, if I can find it, it's not on YouTube or anything, but there is some footage of this first service, as well as the things leading up to it, that was shot by a young woman who was also part of the church plant named Chrissy Wanke, who in a much longer story eventually became Chrissy Colmery. And so she was also kind of a new, similar to the Kleinhans, is like, she was rolled in through another set of relationships, kind of previous to the church plant, just by a little bit, and then all of a sudden found herself caught up in like leading women's ministry, and so it's kind of interesting.
Filming an early documentary.
Yeah, and basically making this mini. She was a videographer. She made a mini documentary about this church plant
With the couch, with Scott's the couch going up and over. Is that the same
Oh,
one
it
where like
is.
they were
Moved
moving
you into the apartment.
your
Yeah.
apartment, and
Yeah.
there was like the couch was being put up and over in the courtyard. I remember seeing that. That was interesting. And you had great hair. You were like
You had great hair, man.
And you were standing. I had great hair too. You were standing. We had great hair.
We did.
And you were. We got to post that somewhere. Maybe there's a link that we can post with this podcast somehow.
I'm sure there's a way.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a
People
way.
need to see that.
So, okay, so
Brian was very serious.
the church planted that, and I remember that our first service had about like 100 people because there were a bunch of guests there that were excited to celebrate with us. We're like, this is amazing. And week 2 had like 16.
Yep.
And we're like, so this is what it's like to
And,
plant a church.
and Brian preached the first Sunday, so
I drove that. Yeah. Do the math, folks.
Okay, so
84% decrease.
So between, so in those early years, I mean, and maybe we can talk about.
I want to
it.
know if Jim has a question.
No.
No, okay, never mind. Sorry,
It's fine.
Go ahead, Scott.
sorry. I was just kidding. Nothing was sparked. No question. Okay, yeah, that's fine. It's
So
fine.
there's a lot of different stories of the lives and the things that the Lord did in that time. One way to trace it is simply by location. So we were in the DoubleTree Hotel there for a year,
Something like that.
about a year, and then we had kind of a portion of the conference room, and we filled. And long story short, we essentially filled it out. People were also parking on the other side of the 10 freeway in the mall parking lot and walking over the 10 freeway to come to church because it was like $12 to valet at the hotel is like the only option. And so we were looking for another.
Just we should probably explain. So we're in a DoubleTree.
Yeah.
We're moved around from conference room to conference room depending on what wedding or something happened. What weird business conference was happening the day before.
Or the jazz lounge.
And occasionally, which is no longer there. We just visited and it's gone now. They basically walled it up. But we went to the jazz lounge. So to give you a sense of church, like this is like very church planty. The jazz lounge was a second floor, kind of overlooking the lobby of the hotel on
Open
one
air.
side, and on the other side, you were kind of on top of like the restaurant in the hotel. You couldn't see people from there, but it was open air, so it was almost like a loft. And we would get put up there every once in a while. And the very first time we're put up there, we're kind of moving chairs up some stairs and getting speakers set up. And it's open air, and it's 9 a.m. or whatever the service time was, 9 or 10. And we did 1 John, and I was preaching, and it was the passage that has the word Antichrist in it. And Antichrists,
But multiple times.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You have heard that Antichrist will come. I tell you, many Antichrists have come. So like people
are
are
checking
eating their
in.
breakfast, like getting their scrambled eggs downstairs, and I'm like sort of trying to like not be to like be bold, but also
Yeah.
not be weird.
Yeah, don't be ashamed of the gospel,
Like don't
Brian.
be ashamed, but also not like shout Antichrist a lot of times when people are trying to like find Tabasco sauce for their eggs or something. This was the vibe. We had all our stuff in a trailer, so like
Yep.
the entire, like all the logistics of the church were packed up in this trailer we would tow from a parking spot over to the church, get a whole team to unload and reload afterwards because you have no location. And so you're just very kind of agile, and it felt very new and kind of fresh, and in that way exciting, and also really kind of intimidating.
Yeah.
Because of all the, you're getting moved around. You're doing open air preaching on Antichrist you weren't planning on, that morning. You've got a whole team trying to make sure that you're plugging in the sound system right, so like it doesn't feedback and wake up the whole hotel. It was just in that way it was kind of beautiful. But it was also so crazy. And that's like, to me, that's one of those stories that gives you a sense of what it was like in that first early time. And the fact that God sustained two 24-year-olds through that is pretty cool. And a high testament to his grace, despite our massive inability. So anyway, so that was the first like year.
Yep.
And then we moved.
And we moved actually just down the street here on Stoner Avenue, just the block maybe before you get to Olympic.
Across from the trash
Across from
trucks.
the trash trucks is some brick buildings. And in there was an art space called La Trova. And La Trova was
It was short-lived, Jim. You
it was
wouldn't
a
have heard of it.
short-lived art and event space. And we rented from them. And we were there, I think, 9 months. So that was an interesting experience too.
Yeah.
How did you even find that place?
I don't know.
Grief.
How did we find that one?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
Probably.
But it was
Jonathan
all
Lee.
black. And you could like shoot film and TV in there.
Yeah.
And there was also a weird like hallway that they wanted to make into kind of like an art space. We'd put like Harper
Yeah.
like back there sometimes, but then sometimes you have to look back because the art maybe wasn't friendly. And so
Yeah.
you'd have to like,
We
It was
had to
very
cover him
strange.
up. And so, I mean, so a little bit of context here too. Harper was the first child we had in the church. So we had to like start a children's ministry, like somebody could like take care of the child. Well, the second child in the church was Addison, like 2 years later. I mean, this is how rapidly the children's ministry was growing.
Scott was single-handedly
I
filling
was
our children's ministry.
doing my
Did
part.
everything I can.
And so, you know, and then there were like 3 and maybe 4, but that was, you know, about it. And so we were there for 9 months, and then the person we were renting from on Sunday mornings, the owner of La Trova, lost their lease, and gave us a week's notice.
Wow.
Told us we're out. We're not going to be here.
It was a
next week.
shady story. Like she
It
kind of
was.
the
No,
person
yeah.
who was like leasing to her. She was not treated very well.
Basically, if I remember correctly, you guys had to get up on a Sunday morning and say, hey, we're not sure where we're going to be
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah.
Here's a piece of paper.
Yep.
Please give us your email addresses, and we'll email you where we think we're going to be next week.
Yep.
Yep, that's exactly what
We ended
did.
up getting one more week out of that space because I remember that somehow it worked where I had to email everyone and say, hey, next Sunday we're back at La Trova House. But after that, and that's when. So at that time,
Yeah,
though,
okay, yeah,
like
yeah.
The church, at that point, we had grown a little bit. I think we were getting close to like, 60, 70, 80 people, maybe even more.
Yep.
And we had, in moving to La Trova, so we were in this neighborhood. So we met at Stoner Park before we got there and like prayer walked around the place. It felt like we were like settled. Who knew we only had 9 months, but it felt like we were landing somewhere a little more stable.
You were praying for this neighborhood before we were even
That's
here
the
long
cool
term.
part.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like you don't realize it until you kind of trace the history back. But we probably walked by the church and prayed for First Baptist, just in the process of doing that, not realizing that we would end up having a home here. Where we're praying for.
Only because you prayed, probably.
Yeah, and at that point, the church is. I mean, you can tell by the children's ministry, but since when a couple of 24-year-olds plant a church, it tends to be people who are within a bell's curve shot away from 24.
Yeah.
And so our church really was 18, 19, 20-year-olds up to 30, 35.
I think 30 was the cap for a long time.
It was
30
definitely
was a harder cap for a long time. They were mostly close friends of your guys's, but there were a few outliers here and there.
Yeah.
But I think I'm tempted to say names, and I'm like, oh, I can't say names. We probably should just avoid that. But I just think something has to be stopped and appreciated is over the last 17, 18 years, the number of church plants that have come into West LA and have failed is an enormous number. And so you hear these stories. It's like, oh yeah, we don't know where we're going to meet next week, or we're not sure who's showing up, or there's 16 people at a service. Like the reality is, it's a lot of it is we're kind of painting it as it's fun. It's fun and like dynamic and wild, but there's also a lot of ways that this could have gone sideways at any point, like a lot of church plans do.
Yeah.
And so like there's so much of like glory to God in this. That's just being in West LA, we've seen so many come and go, so many come and go. Jim sitting here, over here at First Baptist at the time, who knows what's going to happen to this church plant, this group of people. There's 50 people. Who knows if any of those people are going to live in LA next year. And it's such an interesting thing that God sustained that in such a unique way and brought us here together with such a uniquely institutionally stable church here at First Baptist.
No, it was absolutely, in that sense, absolutely miraculous. Like we tell the story and it's kind of like the highlights, but there's so few reasons from a worldly perspective why it should have worked. And God just had his hand in grace kind of each step of the way. I think we've seen so many, and not just churches come and go, but friends, right, who've planted churches and come and gone. And I just know for a fact, like it's not like a greater godliness. It's not that we had a better system. It's not that we had a certain the Lord was just gracious to choose to sustain this church family through a number of different iterations and seasons, all kind of working towards he was marching this towards where we are today, where we sit today. We just had no idea. He was preserving us for something that maybe even felt, maybe in the moment, it may have even felt more personal than it was actually. He's like, no, yes, this is for you, but it's really big. This is what I'm doing here is a lot bigger than you. And so after,
once we got our week's reprieve, we were out of La Trova, and we moved into the Regent Theater in Westwood Village, so kind of in the heart of Westwood. I think the story goes that one of the guys who was living on campus at one of the guys at the Berkeley place.
At the Berkeley place.
He was.
No, I thought it was Adam. Who was like, anyways, it was probably a combination of the two, but I remember the story being like, Adam's like, you know what? We could meet there, then I could walk to church.
Oh, that sounds right. And he and Jonathan brought it to us.
Exactly.
That sounds 100% right.
He's like, if we met here, I'd be able to walk to church.
I could wake up way later and just walk right down.
Yeah. That's at least how the story sticks in my brain.
It's hard to argue with that.
Regardless of the causation, that thought was had. No doubt.
But so for those who are listening, and you maybe think of Westwood Village, if you've been there, this is not one of the two main movie theaters, the Fox and the Bruin, where the premieres are. If you go about a half a block down, there's a very small, kind of easy to miss one-screen movie theater that is still a landmark, right?
Yeah.
Landmark movie theater, and that was where we found ourselves renting renting the entire space
across from the free parking, the 2 hour free.
So
parking.
it was, in some ways, it was ideal.
Yeah.
In some ways, for Scott and I, we didn't have a lot of choices at that point, but there was some trepidation for us because we had worked really hard to not be like a college person church, not to make sure that we had some multi-generationality to us, that it didn't feel like necessarily we were going to be like just a college group or maybe even a college ministry, but that we could appeal to a broader group of people and kind of all of West LA and not just like a college segment. And then we found ourselves just in the heart of Westwood Village.
Yeah.
Just kind of like,
I guess we're a college church now.
What are you gonna, And of course, that isn't exactly what happened, but we did grow a ton, and there we did minister to a lot of people at UCLA because of that proximity, in ways that I think were really powerful. And obviously, this is one of those examples where, you have an idea of what's best, and then God sort of decides that isn't the case, and you end up sort of pleasantly surprised that, of course, He was right.
So all that during this time, Matt, this is while you were attending West LA. This is while you were attending UCLA.
Yes.
Even when we moved into the region, you were still a student at UCLA, right?
I believe so. It's close to finishing, but yes.
So you finished a little early, right?
Yeah. But I believe so. I believe I was still a student at UCLA.
And one of those kind of students where all of a sudden there was this group, and it wasn't just growing by students, but the other thing about it at that point was it was in Westwood, and there were a lot of students. So even though there were a number of people in their late 20s, maybe even early 30s at that point, when you walked in the door, it sure didn't feel like it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right?
I remember specifically you talking to someone who was saying, "Oh, everyone here is college students," and you saying to her, and she was late 20s or early 30s, saying to her, "You look like a college student." Like no one could tell you that you're not a college student. So how do you know?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that's interesting.
And we were there for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, we were there until the merge, so we were there for
Mm-hmm.
three, somewhere between 3 and 4 years.
And that's where the church, in some ways, I mean, we grew more. Part of that was proximity to UCLA. Part of that was whatever God was doing to grow people. And that's where we started our first community groups, which we now call discipleship communities.
That's right.
That was, we were in the theater for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's where, I mean, a lot of the philosophy of ministry, like the way we do church here, for at least on our side, because it's before the merge. So like, but on our side was kind of tested in a lot of ways while we were at the theater, particularly. I remember Matt, especially, I tell the story a lot actually, when I try to explain how we do things as a church, kind of God builds his church. I talk about the move to the theater. So we were trying to move a different direction, but you have to embrace what God's doing and let him build his church the way he wants to build it. So you're kind of a responder to what he's doing. You're not trying to architect things. You're trying to respond to his architecture. And then I talk about how like God built through gifting. And this is where Matt had come in. And I remember it'd been a couple of years. We'd spent plenty of time together, and you and Scott had too. And you had said, I really want to work with homeless people like in Westwood. And I had been through UCLA, and I knew a lot of them by name. And I knew that a lot of them were, I assumed they would kind of take a young student and kind of chew him up and spit him out. Because there are plenty of people who were in Westwood at that time who were genuinely kind of hard on their luck and they needed genuine help. And then there were some other people who were homeless, and they were in some ways like they were very good at extracting money and goods from young college students who were very compassionate and maybe a little gullible. And so obviously not everyone was like that, but there were plenty of those in Westwood at that time. And I knew all of them because I'd been around for 6 years, 7 years. And so I'm looking at Matt going like, man, I think you should probably, maybe, could you just like run a small group for us? You know, like, wouldn't that, but our philosophy of ministry was God builds his church. You know, maybe Matt, you can't decide what God's going to do with someone's gifting. So you have to be like, okay, let's give it a shot. And sure enough, I mean, it wasn't long before, I think you had 2 homeless Bible studies going at one point. Some relationships we still have today from that ministry.
I'm still a payee for at least one of the guys, but the 2 homeless Bible studies on campus, those guys all they really wanted to do was watch Charlton Heston's The 10 Commandments. And so that was like, I mean, we did Bible study a lot, and we, swipe them into the dorms. I got called into the, the office of the resident director like every week because there were complaints constantly. I was like, it is what it is. But I remember we're sitting there, and this is at the time when Netflix is on DVDs. So I had to order 1 DVD at a time because it's like 3 DVDs for Charlton Heston's The 10 Commandments, and then the guys would pass out on my couch in my dorm room, and it was a wild time. But I mean, at that point we had a lot of people who were college students or young professionals. And then there was a good amount of people who were living on the streets at that time who were connected. And I think one of the things that just strikes me about that, and I think we did an analysis at one point looking at our servant ministers, and something like 60% of our servant ministers came to us in college age into the church. God can do a lot through young people. And if you're out there now listening and you're thinking, I'm only 19, what can I do? Like God can do so much in and through young people who just have a passion for the Lord. And I love seeing that now. I love seeing some of our young college, young 20s. There's a tendency to look down on them and say, "Oh, you're too young for that." But exactly what you said, Brian. God builds his church, and he does it in his own way through his own means. And so if you're out there and you're bold and excited and want to do things for the Lord at a young age, we want to support you in that. God, we've seen it done before. Excited to see it happen again.
Well, that's the beauty of there's a way we talked earlier about before recording this, like, there's a way that you can look at history that you've lived and get nostalgic about it. And the beauty to me about these stories, the ones Jim has been telling along the way, but even this one that I lived through, is that it's not like, oh, how great that was back then. Like, these are the same things that I'm excited about now. Like, God building his church now. Like, there's so many, I don't know any church personally that has had homeless people as relationally involved as we have over the last 18 years.
Yeah.
Like, there are people I know their struggles, I know their history. Like, that's just so foreign to so many people's experience, and yet something I think a lot of people would like to be the case. And if I had said, Matt, maybe just like lead a small group, we would have lost out on all of that. And so realizing like how God builds his church now, like the exact same expectancy we can have right now for what's coming next. And having lived some of it, like you were saying, Scott, in the Old Testament, like remember, like having lived some of it it makes me more excited to continue to see kind of what comes around the next corner.
Yeah. So this is so cool because, sorry, this is exactly what was sticking out to me. I mean, even just 10 minutes ago, like you kind of tell the story in you tell the story in the logistics, but the heart and the core of the story is the people. Mm-hmm. And to me, the story of Shoreline is, like you said, we tested and developed a lot of the philosophy of ministry that defines who we are today in those years. But that's not because at that point at like 26 or 27, we had the corner market on how the church should always be and taught it, and people got on board with our vision. Right? Like that's just not how it was. That's never how we functioned. Like, and I think that so much of who the church is today, so much of the core values, so many of the things that have become important to our church family and that define how we function aren't because we were smart enough to like think it up and tell everybody how to do it, but it's because it's because of the people, and it's people, some of which are still here today, living that out, like we are with us, like living that out. A number of people who've been here for a season and gone and now serving the church in other places and other locations. But people, I mean, I'm just thinking of like, feel like a scrolling list of names who weren't just like here and a part of that, but who God used to leave an imprint on the life of the church, and that God built his church through, and that who we are today is a result of the things that they knew were important, the ways that they viewed and understood scripture, the ways that we built together, the strengths and the weaknesses that we had to like figure out how to navigate together, the grace that was shown to us as we bumbled through the early years of ministry with, educations, but like no experience. Yeah. And the grace and trust and even the expectation that we're just going to we're going to continue to grow together. And what excites me similarly is that I think there's a temptation for people to show up to the church now, as established as it is, and say, okay, what are you about, and what do I need to do to get on board? Mm-hmm. But I think I see God building his church that same way now. Like when he brings people with certain gifts, certain passions, certain strengths, certain weaknesses, certain hurts, it shapes who we are and what God is doing here, and oftentimes surprises us. And what's so encouraging to me was that to me is what stands out about the story of Shoreline, was that it's not really a story of two pastors who started it and what they did. It's not really a story about three pastors who came together in their early years and how they built something. Like it's the story of this family, of these people that God placed together and built and grew and developed. And that's what it just stands out to me more than anything. And I think similarly excites me about both the present and the future.
I think that's awesome. I think that's really cool. I also am curious, are we going to get to the merge in this?
We're not.
Okay.
No, that's volume 8.
Oh, that's going to be the
And
next
so
volume.
I
Okay.
basically, this is all to, and there's
no like preamble to the merge?
I haven't even, I thought about getting into how the relationship between First Baptist and Shoreline even began, because a part of that story is during this same time. But I thought I'd just save that. I'd save the kind of overlap for the merge episode, which we'll do next, just kind of the ramp in and
Will we talk about how we hosted Greek classes here?
we did.
Oh, jeez, I forgot about that.
That's right. Brian
Number
believed,
one priority.
Jim, Brian believed that what our church needed, we were a young church, we were just getting started, of all the things that we needed was to learn Greek.
Why did I do that? There was a reason.
And we needed a classroom, and he taught it here.
You wanted to
He
keep
taught it
your
here.
Greek after seminary. That's what it was. It was to keep
And
you
there were some
going.
interested
There were
people.
like 10 people in that class.
No, there were college students
It was
who
the
were
only
like,
class we had ever offered. So it was, of course everyone's like, yeah, okay, I guess we're doing
that
this.
and the
Alpha,
life
beta,
and the life
gamma.
class.
I think that came after.
That was after. Yeah.
I have a vague memory of that. It's like, what's going on?
My
there?
finger still burns from the match that I had to light and then say the Greek
Say the whole
alphabet.
Greek alphabet.
I can't feel with my right pointer finger.
Oh man. But those were, it was incredible years. And during that time we, even a few people from First Baptist would come and like visit. I mean, there were like overlapping relationships. Most people would come and they'd visit and they'd be like, I can't stay here. And then they would, I mean, particularly if they had kids. So we didn't mention at the theater, at the Regent Theater, our kids minute, there wasn't, I mean, it's an lobby, like a tiny little lobby, and then the theater, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so where are you going to put the kids? So we bought a bunch of like kid gates that we could put on the sidewalk outside, and somebody would show up early. I mean, if you want to know like what, welcome team was like, to be a part of Shoreline's welcome team, you would show up early and you'd sweep the sidewalk of all the cigarette butts and everything so that the kids could play. Then you'd set up, we had a gigantic trailer with all this stuff, and you'd set up a kids gates and some toys and stuff like that. And then kids would like just roll around on the ground in the lobby of the movie theater.
Well, as it grew, we wrapped the gate around to the sidewalk.
Oh, that's yes.
So like
Yep.
you'd have an indoor and an outdoor portion.
Yep.
Yeah. And then a lot of the homeless people who were coming
Yep.
would sit at the little tables we had out there and smoke cigarettes. So it was sort of
right next to the
It was like the kids ministry / homeless outreach area all together, involved together, which was really great.
And this is why Harper and Addison's immune system's so great.
They never get
Oh
sick.
yeah, they're rolling around on the streets of Westwood, crawling around on the sidewalk on the streets of Westwood is fantastic. I mean, it was really something special. Driving the trailer was, oh my gosh, chaos. But the one thing that was always very helpful as well is you knew that the service was going a little long when you could smell the popcorn being made in the back. And I think the record still for the longest sermon. So this is the other thing. It's one service. The record for the longest sermon at Cornerstone. Scotty, you want to tell everybody, or you want me to tell everybody?
It was the Book of Numbers,
Book of
which
Numbers.
sounds appropriate. I think that's
Wandering
appropriate.
in the wilderness.
We were wandering in the wilderness for an hour and 17 minutes. And there's one service, so who's going to stop him? There's no popcorn's going in the back. They're selling tickets. People are coming in to watch this.
This isn't Transformers.
Wait a minute.
Hour and 17 minutes. But man, we got all the way through the entire Book of Numbers
That's right. He
in
did the
one
whole thing.
sermon.
Impressive.
Oh,
That's
not
right.
only that, there was one time where the trailer was stolen.
Okay,
Yes.
I was going to tell a
We
story
didn't even
on
tell
Palm
that story.
On Palm Sunday.
On Palm Sunday.
We showed up. My brother
church was
was
stolen.
my brother was in town, and we showed up to pick up the trailer from the alley that it was kept in, a locked alley, but an alley nonetheless.
It's in my neighborhood now, by the
It
way.
is. It is. Shout out to the generosity of Will Bredberg, who lived there and let us park. Who was a member of, actually, pastor of First Baptist at the time, and would just let us park our trailer in the alley in front of his garage, in the alley behind his. But anyways, one day we showed up and it was gone.
Yep.
Which I love the idea of somebody opening that up later and being like, man, okay, what kind of ATVs did we get? What kind of motorcycles did we get? And they open it up. It's like it's a mobile church.
Little blue chairs.
Yeah.
Bibles and like a coloring books and like
can lights.
Oh, the can lights.
Oh my
That
goodness.
Phil would like
man.
set them up.
Bless
and-
that guy, man.
Oh man, he's done everything.
But then, so then we had to do it, kind of like an a cappella. It was really, really funny to be such a kind of stripped down church anyway.
Yeah.
And feel this really cool, guys, we just don't have what we normally have. So other churches looking at us going, you don't have anything to begin with. But to have this really good feeling about that.
Yeah.
But that was the best part about that time. And you hear it in the story, not the best part, but one of the great parts about that time, and you hear it in the stories, is the kind of the faith that it felt like it required to keep going. Like, there's a sense in which you felt so ragtag, especially early on, that you kind of felt like you were relying on God to keep this thing moving. And what I like about that element is, again, I don't know, I don't want to be too repetitive, but it's nothing has changed except the ability to not see that as well. You know what I mean? Like at some level, that's still the same, right? Like being a church in the city we're in any city, but in this city, it requires the same amount of faith. It still requires us to lean on God in the same ways. It's just easier because the building isn't on wheels and can't get stolen, ideally. And there's ways in which it doesn't feel as agile or ragtag or whatever. But the truth is, to do what we are called to do, and have that same level of enjoyment and kind of freedom requires that. It not even requires, it allows, it accommodates, it welcomes and invites that same level of faith, living by faith.
Yep.
In what we're doing right now. No matter how established we get, it doesn't remove the ability we have to live by faith.
It's amazing that so much has changed and so little has changed at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great place to end it. I mean, we could do this for hours.
We got stories. That's what I'm saying.
can
How
do
many
this for
volumes?
hours.
Can we have a side, some sort of side podcast down the road?
We'll just sit here, have some coffee, have some beers, and speak into the microphones. I'm not going to push record or anything, but you can, and we'll just let it go. We'll just let it go. We can tell all the stories. That's right.
Scott wants us to get it all out of our system.
But I will say,
Beers,
I think there are a lot of not on church campus. There are a lot of incredible stories of God's faithfulness to be told. And I hope that even just this reminder will encourage those that were a part of it in any different way to retell those stories.
Yeah.
Not to the glory of Shoreline or to us, but because in the retelling of the stories, we both catch glimpses and reminders of the incredible glory of God. And I think we catch the reminder that you guys have been talking about, which is that not all that much has changed. And we are still today just as desperately dependent on his miraculous working as we were then. So,
And as First Baptist has been for 122 years.
yeah,
Same,
exactly.
Same.
Yeah, we just got this one season, this one cycle of miracles. Jim's like, yeah, First Baptist had a dozen of those. But that's cool that you got one.
We call that the 1920s.
The 30s and 40s.
Well, thanks for being here, Jim, and
yeah.
and letting us regale you
Oh, it's great.
as you have regaled
great.
us over the last few weeks. And I'm looking forward to the next time we can do this, where we get to talk about how the Lord brought us together.
Brought A to B and made C out of the whole thing. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Here's a new tagline for this podcast.
All right.
All right. At the end of it we'll see if this sticks, but let's go make history.
Whoa.
Well, thank you guys. Love you. Thank you all for listening. We love you, and we'll see you on Sunday.
Let's
Go make history.